We are coming on the air for breaking news. Hurricane Harvey barreling into the Texas coastline as a Category 4 storm with 130-mile-an-hour winds. It's the first Category 4 storm to hit the U.S. in over a decade, threatening record rain totals of up to 35 inches throughout much of Texas that could render some areas uninhabitable for months. More than 150,000 people at this hour plunged into darkness. The president declaring a federal disaster for the state, and we are already hearing reports of significant damage, of collapsed buildings, of people perhaps trapped under the rubble. Our ABC News team is spread out along the coast as thousands flee the path of destruction. Take a look at the radar picture right now, and you can see where Hurricane Harvey is. The eye of the storm recently passed over Rockport, Texas. And joining us now from Rockport is the fire chief there, Steve Sims. Steve, I know you've been a firefighter for 13 years. What kind of damage are you beginning to see tonight?
A lot of fairly severe. We haven't been able to get out and really look at things much other than what's right around close to our station. The eye wall just passed over us, and our wind has picked back up again, so we're hunkered down in our main station. And
there are reports that there are several buildings, including a high school, that have partially collapsed. There's reports that there are seniors trapped in a senior center there. Will you attempt rescue operations in the middle of the night?
Not with the wind like it is right now. We have nothing that, to get on the highway with. It's our hands are tied, and it's killing all of us.
I'm sure as first responders, that must be the hardest thing, to have to sit and wait.
Very much.
And yet, what is your community going through tonight? I mean, clearly people are bracing for many more hours, if not days, for this storm's damage to get unleashed.
Oh, most definitely. We've been hunkered down since early evening, and like I say, the eye wall just passed over us.
And it must be quiet now, and yet 130-mile-an-hour winds. What does that sound like in the fire department when you went over you?
The best way I can describe it is a tin can being kicked down the road.
That loud? That
loud, and being in a metal building with the big metal roll-up doors, it rattled and shook and just, real get your nerves on the end.
Sure. You're part of the fabric of this community. What fears do you have for your town tonight?
Well, I fear we're gonna really see some severe damage. Like I say, we haven't been able to get out and see what we got going, but it's not looking good.
Well, the entire country has our eyes on you tonight, and our thoughts and prayers go out to you tonight. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much.
And here in the studio with me live is meteorologist Kate Parker. And I know you live and breathe these hurricanes, but you're also from Texas, so this is close to your heart, I know.
It's surreal just looking at this image, honestly, because it was 48 hours that we went from a tropical depression to a Category 4 hurricane. We're now down to a Category 3, but it's 5 miles an hour. It doesn't matter.
And it was just moments ago downgraded to a Category 3, but Category 3, Category 4, it is still potentially lethal.
Right, and what's terrifying is when you go through the first part of the eye wall, everything blows one direction. You go through the eye, it's quiet, and then you've got the backside of that, everything's knocked loose, it goes the other direction. So the backside is sometimes worse.
The fact that the storm popped up so quickly is part of why evacuations were so tough, but there were also some mixed signals.
There were. I mean, look at the size of the storm, and if you look at the path of it, there's widespread flash flood warnings or watches that will be warnings, and it's for a reason. Look at how this meanders as a hurricane, not as a tropical depression, over Texas through next Wednesday. It's near Houston. You're dumping not inches, but possibly feet of rain, and you've got tornado warnings on top of that.
It is historic levels of rainfall, and we've looked at the 100, 110 130-mile-an-hour winds, and yet what we're really worried about is the flooding.
That's right, because if you look at the storm, it's got so much spin in it. As these bands come on shore, they're going to have spin within them. We're going to see the tornado watches and the tornado warnings on top of all this rainfall, and it's not just a little bit of rain. Look at this. Feet of rain is what we're communicating, not inches, but feet.
And so the rainfall totals say it all. I mean, this is going to drag over for a number of days and have a ripple effect.
You don't only have the storm surge that's coming in, and that's measured in feet, right? 10+ feet in some areas. You have feet of rain on top of that. There's nowhere for that to drain. There's nowhere for it to go.
And you're going to stay with us right here as we continue our coverage of the hurricane. But right now I want to go to Corpus Christi, where Matt Gutman has been throughout the day. It's a place where they could end up getting up to 3 feet of rain, where tens of thousands of people are already without power. And Matt has been out and in the winds throughout the day. Matt.
Hey, Juju, this storm hasn't let up. What it has done is change direction. The wind now coming from behind me, bearing ever more rain. The major concern right now is getting to the people who need help. But power outages are rampant throughout this part of Texas. 120,000 people in and around Corpus Christi without power right now, and there's all sorts of debris in the roadway. Just a few minutes ago, we've seen panel after panel of plexiglass essentially explode off the building, scattering all over the street here. You don't see it, but I'm actually standing on part of it that blew off the building. These are the kinds of hazards that rescuers are facing, and it's why they're struggling so mightily to get out, to get people the help that they need. Even damage assessments at this point are nearly impossible with this deluge coming down, the streets blackened, and all of this debris out on the roadways. Now, it's going to be some time before rescuers are able to get to everybody who needs it. They're talking about hurricane force winds in and around Rockport. That's the town that really got battered by the eye of the storm for another 12 hours. They're going to see hurricane force winds until 8 p.m. tomorrow. This is a very serious situation. The reason we're seeing 17,000 National Guardsmen called up, and again, we don't know how bad it is. We are right here in Corpus Christi, but this whole area along the coast has just been battered. Now, we went to Rockport earlier. We saw it was basically a ghost town. There was a mandatory evacuation. The mayor telling people, if you stay, you better write your name and your social security number with a Sharpie on your arm because you might die. And that is apparently the situation there. It is very, very concerning. And farther up the coast, we're seeing the same types of things. What is going to be happening now over the next couple of hours and days is reinforcements are going to be coming in as much as they can, but so many of these areas are low-lying. The roads just to get in there are going to be inundated. We're talking about this 12-foot storm surge, so just getting to these people and getting them help is going to be very difficult, very trying in the coming hours and days. Juju.
Thanks, Matt. Matt Gutman in Corpus Christi. And we're going to turn now to Port Lavaca up the street, which is also a low-lying area, an area that, as Matt pointed out, may have resources cut off because of the impassability of the roads. Rob Marciano is there. He's been reporting from there throughout the day. Rob.
Juju, we have retreated indoors. It's just too dangerous at this moment to be outside. At times you can hear things clanking across our hotel. Parts of the hotel have been sheared off, namely some downspouts. Parts of the outer walls have been torn off as well. Railings have been pushed down, and there's some street lights out there that are wobbling around. I would suspect that some of those have been torn down as well. We've been without power now for about 3 hours. This thing is hitting with all its ferocity in the dark, which makes it even scarier. It made landfall as the strongest or the lowest pressured landfall since Hurricane Rita in 2005. I was in that storm. It hit in the middle of the night, and this one is just as scary here in Port Lavaca. We are at a high point in this hotel. It's a pretty new hotel, which is pretty surprising to see it basically coming apart. But the water is surrounding us. The storm surge now has made us an island, and you can hear the wind cranking up even more. It is just nasty, nasty to be outside. It's going to be a long night, I'm sure, here in Port Lavaca. Juju, back up to you.
Thanks, Rob. I have to say I'm glad to see you safe and indoors. You know, we're going to turn now to Houston, where Victor Oquendo has been standing by. Clearly, there are ripple effects that will be felt by this storm. But, Victor, give us a sense of the flights that are going to be canceled, the cruise ships that have to go back out to sea. There's a lot to sort through.
There is a lot, Juju, and here in Houston it has been raining all day and into the night. we're ahead of the storm here in Houston, not expecting the main rain event to arrive until tomorrow. Harvey, of course, already impacting travel, as you mentioned. More than 130 flights were canceled between Houston's airports and Corpus Christi's. Even more expected on Saturday, and we just got word that Corpus Christi's airport is now closed and it will likely not reopen until Monday. Something else to consider here. Experts say that Harvey will affect gas prices. More than 45% of U.S. petroleum refining capacity is located along the Gulf Coast. There are dozens of offshore oil and gas rigs in the path of the storm, so we could be looking at significant increases from 5 cents to 15 cents per gallon. And as for the Houston area, Harvey is very reminiscent of Tropical Storm Allison in 2001. Everyone who lived through that here remembers it very well. It just devastated this area, destroying tens of thousands of homes, dumping 3 feet of rain in some spots, and flooding out highways like the one we're standing next to here, 59 South, killing 23 people. Since then, the city has spent nearly $1 billion to shore up the bayous that overflowed then in 2001. So far here in Houston, as they brace for a major rain event, the mayor saying there is no need to evacuate at this time. Juju?
Victor, thanks for that. And Victor is in Houston. And Kate, you pointed out that Houston, even in sort of minimal rainfall, has a severe threat of flooding.
It does. Now, last year, people died in floods in Houston because it's extreme there. The bayous, they really have a problem. And it's important to remember that 9 out of 10 deaths in hurricanes come from water, either on land where you have flash flooding or they come from storm surge.
It's incredible. It's important to point out tonight as we are facing the eye of this storm. Thanks, Kate. We're going to turn now to the nation's capital. You know, this is President Trump's first major natural disaster that he's facing. The federal response already underway. We want to go to ABC's Gloria Riviera, who can talk about all of that response. Gloria.
All of that response here in Washington. We expected to be covering solely the federal response to the storm, but the president has delivered 2 more headlines. We'll get to both, but let's start with Harvey. The president is updating Twitter followers through the night just before 1 a.m., tweeting that his administration is fully engaged with open lines of communication, and to those in the storm's path, that America is with you. Earlier, the president tweeted he had signed a disaster proclamation, that at the request of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, to unleash, in his words, the full force of government help. This makes federal funding, of course, available to recovery efforts, expected to have a very large bill. Now, that news came just before 10 p.m. East Coast time, letting local authorities know they are not alone, but also marking the first test in how well this administration will handle the storm, how effective it can be in an emergency. And speaking of effective, this president has been multitasking since the storm started. About 15 minutes after that news broke, there you see him going to Camp David. Again on Twitter from Camp David, the president announced that he has granted a full pardon to controversial former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Arpaio, who's 85, was facing up to 6 months in prison. He was convicted for criminal contempt of court for ignoring orders to stop detaining suspected undocumented immigrants. Arpaio was an early and outspoken supporter of the president. The two closely aligned in support of building a wall on the border with Mexico. Now, there was quick backlash to that from here in Washington, all over the country. From Arizona, Senator John McCain in a statement saying that pardon undermines Trump's claim to respect the rule of law. Now, that is a big headline, but it's not all. Before the night was over, the president released a presidential memorandum directing the Pentagon to ban transgender people from joining the U.S. military. That memorandum instructs the Department of Defense to stop funding transgender-related treatments. It's a ban that took military leaders by surprise, and it comes on the same day. In his weekly address, the president said, "Every person who puts on the uniform makes our country proud." A lot of news, Juju, not only about Harvey, but all those other headlines, and we'll be following them all.
A lot of headlines, a lot of news to absorb. But President Trump has also said that he may visit Texas as early as next week.
He has, and of course, you and I have covered a lot of these if you look back over history. Of course, Hurricane Katrina comes to mind, and President Bush took a lot of heat for not going to the area. It was several days during Hurricane Katrina until Vice President at the time, Dick Cheney, arrived on the scene. Now, the president saying he will go down to Texas sounds very good coming from the White House. Of course, many of the people there, a presidential visit would have a great significance, but it may cause a headache for all of the responders on the ground there, all of the logistics that go into keeping the president safe and getting him in and out of the area. As Kate has been saying all evening, this storm expected to go on and on and on. So that news from the White House, we'll see what comes of it. But you're right, the president again saying he will get to the region as soon as he can. Juju?
Claire Riviera, thanks for all that reporting from D.C. Well, Kate, final thoughts on the storm as we look at this trail?
We've seen landfall. We've seen a secondary landfall, first on the Barrier Islands and then on the mainland there. This is not over. This is not a landfall and then the storm is over, like we see kind of often with storms. This is into next Wednesday that we watch this meander around South Texas. This is one to watch. This is, if you're living in that area, be prepared for waters to rise at any time. Flash flooding is a real risk. Storm surge will be persistent. Look at those onshore winds, just pushing that water in and keeping it there while all that rain falls at the same time.
You mentioned the speed of the winds that we're looking at tonight. Some of those are equivalent to tornadoes, you were saying.
Yes, a low-end tornado could be 90 miles an hour. The max sustained winds in Harvey right now are 125 miles an hour. That's why we're seeing damage like we are, and we're hearing reports of people potentially trapped in buildings.
And that is why we will continue tracking this storm throughout the night. It is clearly life-threatening. It is a major potential disaster facing our country.